Olá, gente. Então, hoje, nós vamos abordar um tema muito especial, muito instigante, que é as relações possíveis entre o Apartheid na África do Sul e o Apartheid na Palestina. Tanto durante o período que vigorou o Apartheid na África do Sul, quanto depois da transição do Estado racista para o Estado democrático, as continuidades e rupturas. Então, uma reflexão muito interessante que a gente vai contar com um convidado especial. Não é isso, Muna?
Exato. Temos a honra e o grande prazer de receber o professor Farid Esack, que é sul-africano. Ele é professor na Universidade de Johanesburgo, na África do Sul. Eu vou dar um breve currículo dele. Farid Esack é um teólogo muçulmano sul-africano que começou a trabalhar na luta pela libertação da África do Sul, participou. Professor Esack, ele leciona na Universidade de Johanesburgo, como eu falei, onde é professor no estudo do Islã. Em 2018, foi agraciado com a Ordem de Lutuli, Prata, o maior prêmio nacional da África do Sul, por sua brilhante contribuição à pesquisa acadêmica e à luta contra a opressão de raça, gênero, classe e religião. Uma outra coisa também, um outro papel que ele teve, é que ele foi o primeiro comissionado, é isso? Para a igualdade de gênero, e essa atribuição foi dada a ele pelo presidente Nelson Mandela. Então, a gente está na presença de alguém que certamente trará para a gente uma rica contribuição para nosso curso. Agradecemos muito a ele e abrimos o espaço para sua fala. You are more than welcome on our course, Professor Farid Esack.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be at your university. If it were not COVID, I may have used the chance to actually come to the university. But yes, there is another opportunity, as there will be another Brazil under another president in the future. I hope not too long. But there's another opportunity, okay? Colleagues and friends and students, it's an absolute pleasure for me to be with you today. My own history, my own background comes from, I always speak about my life, and some may say, you know, oh gosh, this is wonderful, but I don't think it's nice. I don't think it's nice that I never had a childhood. I don't think it's nice that I was 14 or 15 years old when the security police first came to detain me while I was still a child in school. And very often in my public meetings during the struggle against liberation, against apartheid, I would often speak about our dreams for a future of a country wherein children will be allowed to be children. And now thinking back, I realize that in the way I articulated that as one of my dreams for a future South Africa, I was actually lamenting, I was crying for the loss of my own childhood. And I've been to Palestine about 8 to 10 times, I don't remember exactly. And in many ways there, you see general deprivation, general oppression, and so on. But one of the more painful things for me is the refusal to let children be children. children have to be engaged in a struggle for survival. They have to be engaged in battles with stones against armed occupiers of their country. So in talking about my own life and my own experience with apartheid, that's one of the things that I clearly remember. That my awareness, well, firstly, I often speak about the awareness of looking at my mother, who was what I describe as a victim of the triple oppression of Black women in South Africa, the oppression of patriarchy, the oppression of race as a woman that wasn't white, and the oppression of gender. We had 6 sons in the house, and she lived under 6 men inside the house. And she died a very early death at the age of 52, a heart attack, quite literally the victim of patriarchy, apartheid, and gender oppression. So that's where I personally come from. But in the larger context, I was born in apartheid South Africa, and unfortunately born on the wrong side of the road, because the white people first came to South Africa in 1652 as colonists. They came to colonize the country. It was first by the Dutch, and then there was a series of colonizations from the Dutch, and then the British, and the Dutch, and the British, and the Dutch. And so it went until 1910, when South Africa became the Union of Republic under the British government. In 1961, and South Africa was a part of the British Commonwealth. In 1961, South Africa walked out of the British Commonwealth. Because the British Commonwealth had put too much pressure on South Africa for its apartheid policies. So here were these white people who came as colonists, but we refer to it as colonialism of a special type. In part because they did not rule from London all the time, or from The Hague or Amsterdam. They started thinking of themselves as local settlers, but not as settlers only. They thought of themselves as the owners of the land. So in 1948, this idea of we are the owners of the land given to us by God, this idea became concretized with the coming to power of the Nationalist Party, who was deeply committed to apartheid. A little bit history about that crowd. So the British were often in control, in numbers and in power, of the 2 provinces that was along the sea. But the British, for the Boers, and the Boers we call the Dutch, it literally means farmers. Remember the word, I'll come back to it in relation to Zionism. The Boers, they really resented the British imposition on their life and their lifestyle. And one of the things that they wanted from the Brits was a free hand over the blacks. And the British wanted to keep the black people on their place, but treat them with the law. So you had all the racist laws and so on, stacked against all the black people of South Africa, but it was the law. The Afrikaners, or the Boers, they argued that the law only applies to us as civilized people, not to these black people. So the blacks are in a lawless domain. Sometimes the way you see Israeli law applying to Israelis and people who are living in quote unquote Israel proper, some Palestinians and all Jews, and then there's a completely different set of laws that the same Israelis apply, but to Palestinians who aren't living in, quote, Israel proper. Anyway, so the British were often unhappy, the Boers and the Afrikaners, they were often unhappy with the British and the way the British were in some ways kind of looking after these black people. They moved into the interior, and they described the interior as their land given to them on the authority of God. So this was the promised land that God had given the Afrikaners, and there are some sacred days in Afrikaner history where the Afrikaners entered into a vow and they made a promise with God that if you give us victory tomorrow and in the next days over all these black people who are defying us as we are going to war with them, then we shall pay homage to you every day on this particular day, which was the 16th of December. And until today, if you go to the museum that the Boers built near our capital city, you will see that on the 16th of December, right from the top of this huge thing, right from the middle, the sun will shine right onto this commemorative plaque at midday, at exactly midday, the sun comes there. So they entered into this covenant with God, using all the stuff from the Old Testament, wherein God promises a particular nation a promised land. They used all of this. And until I was a child at school, we had to sing the song of the flag, which speaks about this given to us on the hand of the highest. And of course, I mean, the joke or the problem with this is you can't argue with God. If you come and say, if the one side says, look, God gave this to us, what argument do you have? Now, in a normal conversation, that would be seen as a pathology. If you ask somebody, you know, oh, where did you get this dress? Or, oh, it's a very beautiful house that you have. And the person says, I got it from God. Now, then you'll think, oh, this must be a religious person because, and it's the person means, you know, it's the grace of God that I have this house. But if the person says, oh, no, God gave it to me, I have a document, you know, in my safe upstairs where God has signed it. Then immediately, okay, you know, oh, really? You will smile. And as soon as the person has turned away from you, you'll think, oh, that person is bonkers. She's completely out of her mind. So in ordinary discourse, it works like this. Unfortunately, and even worse, if that person tells you, but actually, you know, I don't believe in God. I don't believe that a God exists. Then that person is doubly insane. So the early Zionists and many contemporary Zionists do not believe in God at all. They didn't believe in God, they were atheists. People like Ben Gurion, people like Golda Meir, many, I mean, they were atheists. And in this respect, at least, the Afrikaners were better. The Afrikaners read the Bible every night. The Afrikaners were deeply religious people, and they genuinely believed that God was on their path. And right, so 48 starts, about 10 years before I was born, and new apartheid laws get introduced. Basically, what is involved? On a large scale, the country is cut up. Different tribes that the government now has difficulty in manufacturing, okay, tribes are confined to different areas. And those areas are called Bantustans. So if you are a Zulu or a Zulu background, you have to live in Zulu land. And in this way, the government created something like, I don't remember now, but something like 9 or 10 of these Bantu stans, these Bantu homelands. And on the map, it looked like a bit of a joke. And every black person was meant to belong to one of these homelands. And in order for them to come and work in the cities, they required permits. And so some of them were given longer term permits and some of them were given daily permits that they had to come and work. But they had to be back into the homeland because many of these homelands were kind of on the edge of the cities, which were white, but the cities and the bigger South Africa was meant for really just white people. That was as far as the blacks were concerned. There were 2 other communities that they didn't know what to do with, the Indian people of Indian origin, and the others were people of mixed origin, a combination of indigenous people who were living in the south of Africa and slaves that came many years before that, or political exiles from Indonesia and Malaysia, where my father's family came from, and they were known as colored people or mulatto. I don't know what is the correct word, but some years ago in Latin America, they used to be called mulatto people, okay? People of mixed whatever ethnicity. Okay, so for them, they could live on the edges of the cities, but they were removed from where they used to live in the cities or in areas near white people. So when I was 6 or 7 years old, we were removed from where we lived because they cut the road, and on this side of the road, they allowed colored people, but on the other side of the road, only white people. So they came, despite the fact that we'd lived there for a long time. They bulldozed the whole area, they bulldozed. And they didn't provide trucks, we had to provide the trucks ourselves. And then we were put into the middle of what we call the bundus, in the middle of nowhere, where there were no schools, there were no clinics, there were no roads, they were busy building all of these things. So under apartheid then, we were evicted because we lived under the wrong side of the road. What else did apartheid mean for us on an ordinary level? You carried a pass with you, and it identified what your race was. And so the big divisions were white and non-white. So all the buses were marked, white and non-white. All the trains were marked. All the public offices were marked. Restaurants had different areas. In general, we weren't allowed to go into restaurants. Restaurants had different areas. So there was a complete separation of races. But we really describe that as petty apartheid, as small apartheid. We weren't allowed to go onto white beaches, for example. And, it's too difficult. It's beginning to not show anymore. But I have some marks here. I would always wanted them to stay here for all my life, where I had gone onto a white beach and the police set dogs onto the beach to come and get me. I refused to get off the beach. And the dogs dragged me off the beach. I said that all of God's earth for all of God's people, all of God's seas, all of God's water, all of God's land for all of God's people. And so I remember I had a mark on my ear at the back, and I had a mark on my, but it's growing off now as I'm getting old. But we call that petty apartheid. The big apartheid was the concentration of political and economic power in the hands of white people. And the different legal mechanisms to ensure that the black majority never becomes enfranchised, get the vote, or get the kind of power where they will actually have control over their land. Now, ordinarily, in non-colonized spaces, you only speak about a democracy. You don't speak about this group must have control over the land. But in a country where Black people were 87% of the population, 87% of the population, the question of majority rule was much more important for us than just the question of democracy. Okay. But this apartheid country they used a lot of ingenuity and creativity and a hard work ethic that these Boers had and that these white people had, and they built up the strongest country in Africa. South Africa was a nuclear power by the beginning of our democratic era. South Africa, apartheid South Africa, had the world's first heart transplant that happened in apartheid South Africa. The first brain scan that human beings know happened in apartheid South Africa. These creepy crawlies that you put in the swimming pools and you put on automatically and it goes and cleans the whole pool, it was invented in South Africa. Your money machine at the bank, it was invented in apartheid South Africa. Internationally, the first model of transforming coal into oil happened in South Africa. South Africa was a super civilized country, just like Nazi Germany. It was efficient. German products and the trains ran on time. And I'm saying this as so apartheid South Africa meant humiliation for people who weren't white on a daily basis. You could not go and urinate in public toilets. There were no public toilets for Black people. Occasionally at some station, and there's one part of the station for whites, one part of this. But again, all of that was petty. The big form of apartheid was all the laws that were put in control to ensure that Black people never get to be in control of their own lives. So this was the major thing about apartheid, okay? We experience it in different ways and so on. It was far more brutal towards Black people, and it was slightly more benign towards Indian and colored people, but it was basically a life on the margins, a life where you lived in terror of white people all the time, where whites were armed and people who were not whites weren't allowed to be armed. So this was what apartheid is. But it is important to distinguish between the petty apartheid, the small daily humiliations, because Israel often doesn't have these small daily humiliations of separate buses, separate trains, separate shops, separate restaurants, and then they say, we're not an apartheid state. But if you look at what apartheid meant in the larger sense, and all the laws that they made to keep Black people in their place, then you get an idea of what the real apartheid was. So the petty apartheid was, we hated it. But our major struggle was to get control of the country so that we can be the masters of our own ship. And we acknowledged that there were whites who lived in South Africa and that there were also South Africans. And of course, when you talk about creating an equal society, they will be equals with us, but equals with us. And in some ways, this is the first major difference between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel. Apartheid South Africa welcomed white immigrants. But there are many other, white people can go to a million places in the world and be comfortable. Why would they want to come to South Africa? So South Africa occasionally, during the Second World War, South Africa welcomed a large number of Jews from the lands that Hitler had occupied, from Poland, and a number of other places. So the Jewish influx in the Second World War was very significant in South Africa. And at other times we had Italians and Portuguese that came from especially Mozambique on the one side and Angola on the other side, running away as Frelimo was having victories in Mozambique. But fine, they were South Africans. And the Freedom Charter, which was the defining document of our country, said that South Africa belongs to all who live in it. But white South Africans never saw us, God had given them South Africa, they argued. But it was never going to be a South Africa without blacks. White South Africans never desired a country without blacks. So they created the homelands around their cities so that blacks can come in every day and that they can disappear at night. But they never tried to get people from other parts of the world to come and work for them instead of these blacks. So the black lives and the white economy was completely intertwined with each other. And the second thing that they didn't do, they didn't wish us into the sea. And they never sought a replacement population for the black people. And this is the fundamental difference between apartheid and Zionism. Zionism, at least political Zionism, that seeks a modern state for a particular ethnic, a religio-ethnic group. You can't say religious group. Although sometimes when you criticize the Zionists, they go on and they cry that you are attacking us for violating our religious freedom. But wait, what beliefs, what the Muslims would call aqidah, or what the Christians would call doctrine, what doctrine do you have? You can be an atheist and you can be a Jew. Okay. You can understand that, you know, I'm a cultural Christian or I'm a cultural Muslim. You can understand that phenomenon. But you can't demand to be regarded as a religious Muslim without believing in God. And you can't demand to be regarded as a religious Christian without believing in Christ. You can say I'm a cultural Christian, okay? So, but what is the basic, the foundation of Zionism is that there is a specific land that had been given to us for the secular or the atheist Jews. We don't say given by who, okay? They'll make a whole lot of different arguments and so on. The religious Zionists will say given by God. And it is our responsibility to bring in all the Jews from different parts of the world to come here. Now wait. Firstly, if you set up a country that will attract only that you say this is only for this ethnicity. Suppose you put up a country and you say this is only for white Portuguese. Now, a Portuguese guy who's been living in Mozambique for many centuries, a certain kind of slightly crazy Portuguese guy from Mozambique, or from Portugal, say from Portugal, where he's comfortable. Only that kind of character will now come to this pure Portuguese state, because Portugal, there are too many blacks in Portugal, there are too many Spains in Portugal, there are too many other English people in Portugal. So a particularly racist type of Portuguese will want to run away from Portugal and come to this pure Portuguese state that you are establishing somewhere in the bushes in Brazil. And so a particular type of Jew comes to Israel to make aliyah. It's a religious sense, you know, I'm going up in life. It's a particularly racist, a particularly weird kind of Jew that decides to make aliyah and buys into this supremacist stuff. Now, when your country is based on, you must get newcomers all the time, newcomers like us, what are you doing? You are making the conditions impossible for the people who have lived there, including Jews, for many, many decades, and in the case of Jews and Palestinians, for many centuries even. Some of the Jews in Israel, a small minority, they have lived there for centuries. But you are making it impossible for them to find a way of getting to know each other, because you are forever bringing in new crazies. And these crazies, they unsettle the more normal Israelis. The Israeli who sometimes think, yeah, you know, I don't want to live in a state of tension with these Palestinians all the time. We have to reach a state of coexistence with them. So in the way that there were a number of whites in South Africa who saw the evil of apartheid. And this is in some ways also a difference. Now, there are many, many Jews in Palestine who support the Palestinians, okay? And many of them are in exile. Some of them are there and they are engaged in different kinds of peace initiatives and so on. But that Jewish crowd, they are diminishing. I mean, where is Meretz, the party Meretz? Or where is Labour? Not really left, but in relation to the right wing. The right wing is strengthening in Israel all the time. So, of course, you can say it's happening in Brazil, but in Israel, I mean, it's like there's nearly a death of the left parties in Israel. And one of the problems is this, because the discourse is continuously moving further to the right. And one of it's as a result of this incoming of people. But this is the foundation of Zionism. So in the very foundation of Zionism is the death of the possibility of living alongside each other. It's antithetical. The very idea of Zionism means that the others have to be pushed away. And they are pushed away in various ways. In laws, in house demolitions. If there is one suspect who threw stones, then they come for the whole family and they'll destroy the entire orchard, the entire orchard or the entire olive grove. They will destroy under collective punishment. And in fact, in South Africa, we never had the notion of collective punishment. Collective punishment was seen once or twice when the government wanted to charge a whole crowd of people who were throwing stones at something or were involved in the death of a policeman, and they were there as a whole crowd. So only in 2-3 court cases did we have the idea of collective punishment. But in Israel, the law allows collective punishment. So if you are an activist, your home can be destroyed, your entire home. And you know, activists, they're not generally the owners of their homes. Their grandparents own the homes, or their mothers and fathers own the homes. You know, students, activists, it's not. No. Under the collective punishment, they can punish a whole village. And this is one of the other huge differences that there is between apartheid South Africa and Israel. So the first one was apartheid South Africa's need for black people, and it didn't wish us into the sea. The second is the nature of Zionism itself, which must imply the death or the vanishing of the Palestinian people. And that is why all of this talk that they've always made, you know, about a two-state solution and so on, they were never really interested in a two-state solution. In Israel itself, they have refused to define their borders. It's one of the few countries in the world that has never defined its own borders. And the third distinction that I made between apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel is the whole question of collective punishment. And so here we see the problem of tying your identity. Here you see the problem of tying your identity as a religious person to an ethnicity. Oops. Okay, is everything okay? Yes? Okay. Here you see the problem of tying your ethnicity to your religious identity. And so the idea of an ethno-religio state, such a state must mean, I mean, I don't care what you want to call the state, whether you want to call the state Pakistan, or whether you want to call the state, Israel or whatever, but but the basic idea is that if you have a state that is founded for a particular ethnicity, and you say that only people of a certain ethnicity, I mean, really, this is in this case it translates into also race. But how is it possible that if you create a state for the Jews, it's not possible for you to have the Chief Justice in that country ever being a non-Jew? It's not possible for you to have the president of that country ever being a non-Jew. You can't allow the non-Jewish population to outgrow the Jewish population. So the idea of an ethno-religio state, it is by itself a negation of the whole idea that rights reside inside people. It's a negation of the notion of universal human rights. So, and that goes for all ethnic states, okay? But it is particularly pernicious, it's particularly bad when that ethnic state is founded on a territory that is already occupied and has been occupied for centuries by another people. Or if that territory has been acquired through war. And this is largely the narrative of the Palestinian people, through various nakbas, through various catastrophes. And now, I mean, Israeli historians, they're now upfront about this, that the Palestinians were thrown out of their land. I mean, one of the fascinating things, you know, about Israel, I've never encountered this anywhere else. It's a harshness. It's a, you know, the words often used in relation, it's a Jewish word, chutzpah, the cheek, you know, I don't care shit, you know, I'll tell you exactly what it is. So Israeli historians, I mean, they don't care shit. They'll tell history exactly as it is. And history is about the expulsion and a series of acts of terrorism that expelled these Palestinians from their land. And then the irony of it all, you know, if I think I'm going slightly off the point now, the Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem, you know. So you go to Yad Vashem and you see, you know, it's just horrific. I mean, to just remember the cruelty, the barbarity of what the Nazis had done to the Jews, you know, it's kind of, it's frightening. It's just inhuman. And so the museum goes up, 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 and slightly and narrower, narrower, narrower. So you get, and then you look at all these exhibits on different sides of what may look like a tunnel. And in the end, when you get out, and you're like, by now you're desperately in need of fresh air or sunlight or something. Yeah, freedom from this anxiety, this, and here is this land in front of you. So the whole construction of this narrative, that the only answer to this being pushed and being suffocated, the only answer to is, this expands the land of Israel in front of you. So the ideologization of the Holocaust for narrow ethnic, political, and colonial purposes. But the irony of this is that as you were walking and memorializing on the right and on the left and seeing the suffering of the Jews, that the Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, was built on land of Palestinians that was destroyed by the Zionists, and the museum was built. So how do you build your... anyway, I think you know what I wanted to say there. Very, very quickly, just 2 or 3 other points that I want to touch on, and I'll... So now, in a post-apartheid South Africa, we have come a long way. We've come a long way. We're living in a free country. We're living in a free country. We're living in a country where we have freedom of the press. You can walk where you want to. You can live where you want to. We have democratically elected government. We are doing particularly well on the gender equality front. At least 60% of our country's cabinet are women. And at least 40% of all our parliamentarians are women. The Speaker of our upper house, most of our ministers are women. The Speaker of our upper house is also so I think more than half of our senior judges are women, right? But the truth is that the economic stranglehold of the West has continued over our country. So South Africa, there's hardly been any serious land reform in South Africa. Most of South Africa's land is still in the hands of white farmers. That's where most of South Africa's land is. Most of South African economy is still controlled by white. But with the one major difference, that they have gotten a significant amount of Black entrepreneurs, businessmen to join them through Black economic empowerment. And so now it is increasingly a non-racial capitalist economy that we are dealing with. And then one must ask, you know, is this really the quality, the land of equality that we had fought for? There was a very stark racial face to the economic exploitation of our people. And that racial face is now slowly changing, okay? So you see far more Black people also in businesses, although not in, it's more in kind of in investment kinds of entities, rather than say in engineering or in manufacturing or, you know, the kind of stuff that often serious capitalists are also busy with. So, and in South Africa, as we were moving towards resisting apartheid, the South African government pushed for what they called order, law and order. And the liberals in South Africa called for peace and stability. Peace and stability. And we argued that it is not the lack of peace that is the problem in our country. We argued that Nazi Germany was a peaceful place. All the Jews in Nazi Germany went in peace to the trains that were taking them to the gas chambers. Nazi Germany was a peaceful place. Nazi Germany was a stable place. It's not peace that we were interested in. We were interested in justice, in racial justice, and in economic justice. And so to reduce the whole narrative of the Palestinian people to a search for peace. Oh, the problem is we don't have any conversation partners amongst the Palestinians. Where is, if only the Palestinian Mandela can arise? We're talking about Mandela. That old man, he sat on Robben Island, the prison, for 26, 27 years. Why did he go there? And I'm not advocating violence, people. But Mandela sat on the island, not because he organized Sunday school picnics for peace. Mandela went to Robben Island because he founded Umkhonto weSizwe, the armed wing of the African National Congress that waged an underground armed struggle against the apartheid regime when all options of talking to the regime had come to an end. And Mandela was offered by the apartheid regime 10 years before he came out, he was offered his freedom. If he is prepared to renounce the armed struggle, Mandela said, I'm a prisoner. Prisoners can't negotiate. I'm sorry. And I will not renounce the armed struggle for as long as I'm in jail. And then he stayed there for another 10 years. So we need to be careful that we don't rewrite history in our own way, that we don't look at the struggles of the oppressed through the eyes of our own lenses, comfortable bourgeois lives and so on, and then pass judgments on the means that the oppressed undertake to have their freedom. And this Mandela, you know, who's everybody's uncle, everybody's favorite uncle or grandfather, it's the Mandela that the Zionists keep on throwing at us. But it's not a Mandela that they knew in prison or that they knew before he went to prison. And all the Jews in South Africa who were active in the liberation struggle, all of those Jews are anti-Zionists. Not one of them supports the state of Israel. If they were active in the liberation struggle in South Africa, then they know what is the correct direction as far as the colonial settler state of Israel is concerned. Thank you very much. Let me stop there. And I could take some questions from you.
We are thankful for your talk and very informative, and I'm particularly appreciative of the way that you intermeshed your the biography of people's lives, and we wanted to know that, to understand to what you refer to, and this is the first for me, petty apartheid, and if you like, big time apartheid. Yeah, I think this is a distinction that is very worthy and will be important for our discussion on the course, and rightly so. And I would think, as a Palestinian, I would think that neither should be negated. I mean, the petty is petty as a way of expression, but in no form or means is it to be belittled in that sense. Absolutely. So I'm very happy that you brought on these two dimensions, let's say, of apartheid. I am also particularly, how do you say, I'm touched by the reference that you make on Mandela and the way that there is so much, I would say, distortion as to his figure and what he presented. Yeah. And I remember I did my master's at the University of Manchester, and Manchester is the second biggest Jewish community and very strong and vibrant in England. And I remember we wanted to pass a motion on the closure of the universities during the first Intifada. And I gave a talk basically speaking about the harassment of women by Israeli soldiers. And there was this South African who was in my department, very progressive, left white South African, left Jewish. And she just attacked me over that and basically said that it was all lies, that the Arab women, the Palestinian women are oppressed anyway, and they are, second class, and all that narrative in the sense of belittling what I was saying. And I just replied to her, well, look, if I were white and blue-eyed, I'm sure you would believe me. And she just snapped. She said, are you saying I'm racist? I said, yes, I'm saying you are racist.
Yes.
And that was the discussion of the whole department. Now, in a week's time, an Israeli refusenik, or someone who refused to serve in the army, came to speak, and he was hosted exactly by this group of progressive left Jewish community. And I went. I was the only one there. I went to the meeting. I knew about it last minute. And I went in and I raised the same point that I'd made in the meeting where we were trying to pass the motion. And he affirmed it. He said, I am ashamed as an Israeli to say it's true. We do harass women, Palestinian women, and we do actions of the sort. And I just looked at them, and they were present, some of the people who were at the meeting. And I said, do you remember my theory about being white and blue-eyed, and then you'd believe me and all of that? So I think this discussion is extremely important because it tends to blur the vision vis-a-vis issues of that sort. And I'm particularly happy that you brought on this rift in terms of whether there is or not coherence in the debate, on this matter, and it does make a lot of difference. My question is in regard to the character of South Africa. You described to us so many features of a South Africa that was progressive, the first country, the strongest economy in all of Africa, all the scientific
achievements.
I don't know the word, achievements. Yes, all the scientific achievements are, and we're facing something exactly similar nowadays. And so people say, what do you want? Do you want me to stop using, when we speak about boycott, disinvestment and sanctions? And they say, do you want me to stop using, I don't know.
Yes. I'm going to stop using my cell phone or my computer because...
Yes, or the security of my house because they're excellent in vigilance technologies and all of that. And or recently, for example, somebody was at the university was commemorating this new achievement on part of the Israeli science, where there is this quick test that you do on the airport. And I engaged her with a discussion briefly to say, but look, we should ethically also know where this comes from, what the technology is, what they imply, and so on. So I would like to hear more from you in regards to what we are reading more and more about the idea of neoliberalism aligning and unashamedly being a partner with apartheid Israel in regards to these scientific discoveries or scientific achievements and so on and so forth. What is the scenario? How can we understand how can we understand this question?
I mean, look, so in some ways, there is a deep racism behind the Zionist project. You have to, and the early Zionists acknowledged this, you had to have a disdain for the Palestinians, Christian, Muslim, in order for you to have the guts to go in and expel them from, you had to recognize them as non-human. Okay, this you couldn't do this to other people if you recognize them as human. And at the core of racism is the negation of the full humanness of the other person. Right. And then, of course, the elevation of your own. But even in this, the elevation of your own, the Ashkenazi Jews from Europe, the white Jews, they are deeply racist towards the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews who come from the other parts of the Arab world, or who are darker skinned, or whose hair isn't very straight, or okay. So there's an internal kind of racism also. Okay. Of course, I mean, so you're not calling upon now saying, oh, we need to be in solidarity with the Mizrahi Jews, you know. Wait. That's another story. But the point that I want to develop is this, that in looking at how capital is fronting or masquerading as white racism in the United States, or masquerading as Jewish racism in the form of Zionism in Israel. But at the end of the day, capital is only seeking the best means of advancing its own interests. And so you must get a white model, or a white and a blonde model. They do appreciate the whiteness of that model. They do appreciate the blondness of that model. But the most important thing is that model must perform and deliver to bring the sales in of whatever they are advertising and using that white body for. So on the one hand, there is an inherent appreciation and a value put on that white woman, on that white body, especially if it also fits these things. But far more important, connected to it also, it's in some ways the way Trump works, you know. He was looking for all these good-looking, blonde, sexy women and so on, and parading them. But underneath that, there was no serious respect for these blonde women that he was masquerading with and parading with. Trump was into money, and he was using those women to get money. So Melania and all of them, they became a serious part of the problem. And Trump's whiteness was a part of the problem. And all the white right in the United States, they became a serious part of the problem. But in the end, if you look at, say, for example, COVID, and how Trump's treasury worked in dishing out COVID support, the millionaires made it big under Trump. So what I'm trying to say is that while Jewish identity or the Jewish heritage, or this is Trump, and this is defended by the United States, and these are our allies. But at the end of the day, behind this, in the same way that you find another kind of racism behind the Ashkenazi Jews, you find a deeper interest, geopolitical interest in that part of the world. And for a long time, Israel was the major manager of capital's interest in that area, through keeping an eye on and control over these other Arab states. And in some respects, that scenario is now changing. And with it, Israel will lose its worth to the United States lobby, because the other Arab states, for their own survival now, they have to move closer to power. And power for them is the United States through, of course, Israel. And so that should be, so I'm saying that they are deeply intertwined, but we shouldn't underestimate the ability of capitalism to go for a great black actress as a model. If she can pull in money from Africa, Africa doesn't have that much money at the moment. So we need more white models, because even African people would be happy with a white model. Let's be frank, would be happier with a white model, because that is still the image of. So what I'm trying to say is this, that capital uses other forms of identities, the looks, for example, or the race identity. It uses that because it builds into years and years of racism and racist stereotypes and so on. But at some stage, it is happy to sacrifice that also as long as capital can thrive. And that's I think it's very important for us on the left, you know, even as we are fighting for Palestinian rights. Don't think that no Palestinian whatsoever can ever become a sellout. You know, that as long as the person is a Palestinian, he must be a good Palestinian. No, goodness and badness doesn't reside in your ethnicity. I mean, this is the heart of Zionism, that because you are a Jew, you must be good. You must have inherent value in you. Yeah. That was a bit of a longish answer to your question, Mona.
Farid,
Thank you.
Question. When you first went to Palestine, how do you feel?
Yes. Are you asking me when did I first go? It's at least.
And how did you feel about it? I'm sorry. He also wanted to know, how did you feel about it as a South African?
Yes, it was about, it was at least 30 years ago. And it was at least 30 years ago when I went to Palestine first. And the sense of déjà vu, I have been here, I was here, I am here, I am from here. This is how we live in South Africa. This is South Africa. The fear of the guys in uniforms. And by the way, we also had black policemen. So the Zionists, they often make these things about, you know, we have these Ethiopians and these things, and so we have black Jews also. We had black sellouts also, Gacha Buthelezi, we had black homeland leaders, we had black judges in the homelands, and we even some had into the apartheid system and so on. But the sense that, oh, I am back home. And I don't know, but I just felt a huge sense of obligation that this is my struggle. And as the South African struggle kind of winded down, you know, two struggles became very, very important for me. The one was gender justice, and the other one was the struggle for the Palestinians. And if I may, Fabio, just go slightly off the point, I studied in Pakistan for 8 years. And when I arrived in Pakistan, I was shocked at the gender apartheid that I saw. And on the beaches, in the streets, everywhere. And I thought, Farid, this is exactly what you as a black male are experiencing in South Africa. This is what women are. Look at the beaches. There are no women. Look here in the markets. Look at the airport. Look. So I recognized gender apartheid when I saw it. Then you didn't say, oh, why am I singling out gender apartheid? Why am I singling out Pakistan? Da, da. No, then you said, oh, that Muslim guy, that Muslim theologian, he's so progressive, da, 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 da. When I came to Israel, and I saw exactly what I have been living through in South Africa, and worse. In fact, every veteran of our liberation struggle who had been to Palestine, if you were to ask them, can Palestine be compared to apartheid South Africa? They will tell you no. Apartheid Israel is much worse than anything that we experience under apartheid. This is the standard answer that you get from the veterans of our country's liberation struggle. So there was a huge sense of déjà vu, and also a sense of anger that the world had conveniently recognized our struggle. Not the world, not the Reagans and the Margaret Thatchers and so on, but global communities. And the Palestinians, because of white and European guilt at the crimes that they committed towards the Jews, because of that, they're not able to recognize that this victim that they had created had turned into a monster. So this was my sense when I went to Palestine and to Israel.
Farid, I thinking here about another question that is very, very important to hear about you. South Africa transition was made on basis of the Freedom Charter, as you said before. When you look to Palestine, we have the Oslo, the idea of two-state solution. For you, what is the project? What have to be done to have a fairly solution?
Fabio, this is not a cop-out, but I don't think it's a fair question to put to me. This is a question that has to be put to the Palestinians. However, as a South African, so I can't give you an answer. I can give you a thought or two, but no ways I can give you an answer. But as a South African, I, for the life of me, can't see how separating people from each other on the basis of race was a problem for South Africa, and it is a solution for Israel. Separating people from each other on the basis of race, it is seriously problematic. People have to be at a baseline. You commit yourself to equal and universal rights for everybody who live in that territory. That is, other than huge complications, I mean, the two-state solution at one stage, I mean, although I must say the map of Israel and Palestine is a much bigger joke than what South Africa's Bantustan homeland maps look like. A much, much bigger joke, okay? In your class, in fact, you could use these two maps, you know, of the Bantustan homelands and the Palestinian territories. The Israelis were never serious about Oslo, never serious about it. Unfortunately, the Palestinian leadership at that time fell for it. But there were many, many people who disagreed with it. So I don't know, but my ideal of a society, it's a non-racial society, it's a non-sexist society. And I certainly don't believe that any society must privilege one religio community over another religio community. So religious states, I have no time for them. Ethnic states, I have no time for it. The idea of the nation state itself, I find very problematic, but that's another story for another day.
Thank you very, very, very much, Farid. It's a great time hear you. It's truly a class. I think it's incredible.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed being with you and your students very much. Okay. I'm sure all of your classes are also now by Zoom.
And the time difference, unfortunately, otherwise we would have had the great pleasure to host you real time, but it's 6 hours difference. And so it's not possible this time. شكرا كتير ممنونين.
عفوا يا أختي خير.
Thank you so much.
Take care Fabio. Take care Mona. مع السلامة.
مع السلامة.